A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ansley Review of Books. I'm Jake Silbrookins. Each episode, we take one book, usually something speculative, sometimes something adjacent, and we ask a writer or a critic, an editor or a scholar to talk us through it. Today we're talking about Ray Bradbury's collection, Killer Come Back to Me, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Aigner Loren Wilson. Aigner is an award-winning editor and award-nominated writer who has published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Lightspeed, Interzone, Fantasy Magazine, and more. She served as a senior fiction editor for Strange Horizons from 2022 through 25. She's also served as a guest editor for Fireside Fiction and Apparition Literary. Her work has been called deeply disturbing and evocative. She holds an MFA from Bennington Writing Seminars and is currently looking for an agent for her short story collection. She currently works as an editor, writer, and senior content strategist for clients and at the horror culture and criticism publication Darker Times. I want to talk to you more about that later, but Aigner, thanks so much for joining. How are you?
I am so good. How are you?
I'm doing good. As we were saying before I clicked record, I just had to move to a new studio, so I spent the last 10 minutes frantically rearranging wires. But I think I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's been hectic, but it's good times. How's your summer starting out?
My summer it's been pretty hectic as well, but in a good way, just like finishing a lot of projects, working on projects, but all feeling really great, really happy to be here. Yeah. And also congratulations on the Hugo nom.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm very happy about that. So we'll see how it goes. Are you doing any conventions this summer?
I am not doing any conventions this summer. I gotta tell myself that second time was for me. That
Yep.
was like I am not doing that this time.
I need to start spacing them out a little bit. And as I was saying, like I spend like 10 months of the year like hermited. And then I'm like, oh, I'll just go to 9 cities in July. That'll be fine. Yeah. Oh, and then it's fried. Before we get into Bradbury, anything else you have been reading that's interesting?
Yeah, I just finished up with Isabella Cayene's The Possession of Alba Diaz, and I really love her books. She's got the 2 out right now. I believe it's 2, Vampires at El Norte,
Mm-hmm.
and then this one that came out either last year or earlier this year. But she's one of those historical speculative fiction type writers that reading her work feels like learning at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love that experience. I also just finished up with a nonfiction book, Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg, and that I don't know if I'll ever recover from that reading experience. Yeah, it's a pretty impactful book. So I think I finished it last month or earlier this month, and I'm still just having moments of just reeling from that experience. And then I just finished The Ship of Death by Kyle Winkler,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in the ARC, so it doesn't come out, I don't think, until this fall, but it's a really great horror, but like a horror for board gamers. It's set up like a person gets this board game in the mail and is supposed to be writing a review on it. And so it's their playthrough of the game. It's it's written with like the instruction manual, the legal contract that he has to sign. It's a really fun book and really wild to read. It's one of those that makes you feel like, am I going crazy? Or like, is it the book?
Oh, cool.
So it's really great. It was a very fun reading experience.
I remember seeing that that cover on a fall catalog, and it was like a very fun kind of like pulpy, dark horror kind of cover.
Yeah. And Winkler definitely delivers on that.
Nice. That's cool. While we're talking covers too, I have to shout out the Vampires of El Norte cover, which I just really love. That like, it's kind of like that like gothic heroine thing, but like in a different direction. Like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I actually have it on my bookshelf, and it's one of the books that faces out because I love the cover so much.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I've been reading a bunch of stuff. I'm going through. I always sort of assume that I will have read all the Hugo list. And then this year I was like, oh, hold on a second. I have not read all the Hugo lists. So I'm like scrambling to read those, going through and checking off the novels I haven't read. So I just did Tchaikovsky's Shroud, which I liked. I'm kind of like, I don't want to throw shade at it, but I'm kind of like, it's fine. I'm like, it's making me wonder, like the list this year, like in in the Hugos like leans a lot more fantasy, and I think that's like been a trend. I'm not sad about that trend, but it kind of makes me wonder like, is there like the quote unquote hard science fiction out there in the way that there used to be? Because it definitely like Tchaikovsky's book is like really clearly like it's about exoplanets, it's about like different kinds of biologies and how different kind of intelligences might work, how you would build a machine that could withstand like pressures at the bottom of like, you know, a heavy pressure moon kind of thing. And it's fine, but I'm like, I don't know. Is this? I don't want to like ding on Tchaikovsky for this, but it's just making me wonder like, is this a form that is still like vital? Anyways, let's get away from science fiction.
Yeah, let's let's leave it
Leave it.
behind.
Let's go to some murders. So today we are talking about Killer Come Back to Me. This is a collection of Ray Bradbury's short crime stories. They were published in 2020 by Hard Case Crime. Most of the stories here are from crime and detective magazines from the 40s and 50s, but there are some later entries and there are a few from more science fictional venues like Weird Tales and things like that. Bradbury, in case people don't know, it's possible, he's most known for his science fiction and fantasy work, things like Fahrenheit 451, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and The Martian Chronicles. Obviously, really, really big name in science fiction, and he was also really, really, really prolific in short fiction. So this is kind of fun to like dive back to like see like a working writer in some ways getting going. I was really struck by some of the through lines from this to his other work, fantasy and science fiction and horror work. But Anya, tell me why this book? Why was this one of the ones that sprang to your mind when we started talking about talking?
I want to say when we first started talking and like you asked me like which books, I was at the time in a very Samuel R. Delany mode. And I was reading a lot of his books and I just completed my MFA, and during each of my terms, I would pick a specific author to do a deep dive in and then write like a critical paper on. And when you reached out, it was Delaney. And I think the book I wanted to talk about was actually a nonfiction book. And you were like, we don't do nonfiction. What's another one? And then I had just gotten off of my Ray Bradbury term, where I did a deep dive into his work, into the critical reception, and just his style. And Killer Come Back to Me is one of those books that like I think about, it lives rent free in my head. I think about as I'm falling asleep. It's like one of those, I think like you said, it's your way of looking at a working writer. Like these stories of Ray Bradbury were written in his 20s. They're like his early work. It's super rough in a lot of ways. Like there are like a lot of critics, of course, of Ray Bradbury. There's a lot of historians and there's a lot of research into his writing, looking at his letters, his diary entries, and really digging into what made these pieces work. And a lot of them, like a lot of the critics and historians, see these stories as Ray Bradbury's attempt at coming up with his original style that he later on has, and that like that we can recognize and get really into. So like I think you called out in some of your notes that we'll go over later, but like some of them are very rough and sort of weak, but you'll get like a line or two that'll come up and you'll be like, oh, but that's that Ray Bradbury spark. That's that like figurative language. That's like that vividness, that sensory detail. But then, you know, you'll come across stories that aren't that great, and you're like, oh, I would not think that Ray Bradbury would write something like this. But they're all very, and he even names this, I think in the afterword, he names it, but he's like, these were really rough, and I was just trying to figure things out. So don't, don't lambast me too much about it. But these are stories where you can really see how a writer figured out during a time, because I want to say they were around World War II that they were coming out. And so publishing was in a really interesting state where there wasn't a lot of print publishing happening. He wasn't getting a lot of sales in the fantasy and sci-fi magazines. So he switched to mystery as a way of like, I need money. I like am writing all of these stories. Let me like try my hand at this. And when he was able to sell some and they were getting like popular, he was like, I'll just keep writing them, even though he wasn't a mystery writer. That's not who he was. He was just a writer trying to figure out his style. So, like, when you read through this collection, it's got an essence and an aura to it that just feels so thought provoking. Like, you can't help but stop and be like, so this is the guy that wrote Fahrenheit 451. This is the guy who wrote Dandelion Wine. And he's doing stuff that, like, yeah, you can kind of see like little hints of what is going to come later. There's like a couple of stories, and we can get into them more later, that I'm like, oh, this was totally precursor to this later story that he wrote. And even when I tried to dig in, like, into, there's a book called The Life of Fiction that's by a couple of, I have it. Yeah, they're by Ray Bradbury scholars. So Jonathan Eller, who wrote the introduction to Killer Come Back to Me, and William F. Tupons, I think is how you pronounce that. And it is I think it's about 600 pages, but it is a thick book, and it all is like a deep dive into his work, into his style. And there's a whole chapter on his mystery writing. And yeah, I think that, like, if you're a writer, if you're a reader of Bradbury, these stories are just indispensable. Like, they are must reads. And that's how, yeah, that's kind of why I thought of this for this.
Reading his afterword. So, like, on the one hand, I do always try, like, when you read writers talking about their own writing and they're talking about like 4 or 5 decades earlier, I do want to take it with a grain of salt. However, I do kind of believe him when he talks about his writing schedule, where he's literally submitting one story a week.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like bowled over by that, and I'm like, yeah, like of course, right? Like as a working writer, that would be ideal. And it's interesting to see this stuff kind of out of the trenches. And yeah, I do really love even the ones where like I'm like, okay, I don't know if that works so well. I can still see him like reaching for particularly like his use of metaphor and his setting up atmosphere in these sort of startling ways. Even like some of them are like so over the top, and some of them feel very like pastiche of like, Chandler, Hammett, kind of stuff. But then like every once in a while things kind of line up. And I'm like, oh no, actually that rules. Like, he has a lot of these like overdrawn. What's the one story? I want to find it. There's this one because I really laughed where he was using a lot of like noir. Oh, it was in the title story, Killer Come Back to Me.
Yeah, I was gonna say Killer Come Back to Me is very, very noir voicey.
Uh-huh. He's got
Yeah.
his stomach muscles laid down like a crouching animal. And
Yeah.
then when he goes in to rob the bank, and he describes the bank tellers in shining cages that kept domesticated animals inside them with cool green money at their pale domesticated fingertips. And it's like it's just like a little too much, but like I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then in some of the stories, it really starts landing. And I like what you said about how you can see what he's kind of working toward with some of his big themes that come out in his other work. And I guess we can just name a couple of them, so feel free to hop in. But like two that really jumped out for me was one, anytime there's something circusy involved, a light bulb goes on in old Ray's head and it works. And the other one that I don't quite know what to call it, but this collection is really, really good. Even though like these are, most of these stories are sort of published for just kind of pulpy, kind of like shock schlock, right? Because it's not even like at a short story, you can't even really do a mystery. It's just kind of like, here's a brutal crime and let's put some twists in it, so it's interesting for 10 pages. But despite that, a lot of these stories use the point of view or the memory of being a child in a way that is really effective, I thought. Those were two that jumped out at me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you said that. And I think something that really sort of plays into it. First, when it comes to the circus, you might know this, but for listeners who don't, Ray Bradbury was super, super inspired by the World Fair. He went to it as a kid, and it just opened his mind to a world of possibility. So carnivals always, like, they are just like there for him. And I believe one of the ones that one of the short stories in this collection, Corpse Carnival, is one of my favorites because you can feel that wonder and that danger of like a carnival atmosphere. Because carnivals do have that wonder danger when you go to them. They have that, like, oh, there's these really fun, cool things going on, but there's also a lot of danger happening. There's people on trapezes, there's rides that are operated by people who may or may not know how to operate them. It's a scary world. Fear comes up a lot in his work, and a fear of that other side of the world that you might not realize is there. And that, I think the reason why he goes to child perspectives a lot is because of, like, there is so much as a child that you don't know is dangerous. And it's really easy to, like, kind of, yeah, put a child in a situation and let them go. Like he has a story that is about a baby assassin, the small assassin. um,
So
and
good.
it's really funny. It's like silly. It's silly, but it's good. Um, and when he does things like that, it always makes me think of like, yeah, being a kid like Ray Bradbury, growing up in Indiana, I believe it was, not Illinois. I want to say Illinois, but I
It
think
was
it was
no, it
Indiana.
was Illinois. It was up in
It
Waukegan.
was
Just
Illinois.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay. Okay, so yeah, growing up in Illinois and then moving to California to like Los Angeles, that I know from reading like just different bios of him and even reading his own essays, like growing up in that, seeing crime like that for the first time, seeing death, murder, having that just be there was a scary and wonderful thing that I think just like he kind of keeps returning to. Like authors have that theme, that kind of work that they keep returning to. And I want to say in the introduction, and I pulled out a quote because I thought it was so spot on. But yeah, so it's in the introduction done by Jonathan Eller, who's like a biographer and a scholar of Bradbury, but he's quoting Damon Knight. And Damon Knight is talking about Bradbury's stories and his themes. And the thing that he says, and I was like, this is a perfect kind of encapsulation of Bradbury, is the that his style focuses on the fundamental pre-rational fears, longings, and desires, the rage at being born, the will to be loved, the longing to communicate, and the hatred of parents and siblings, as well as the fear of things that are not the self. And I think that throughout this collection is really, really prominent. And I think it gets watered down later, but or not watered down, but focus. It gets really focused. So I think of like his later novels, Dandelion Wine and Fahrenheit 451, which do have a lot of that, but in a way that's not as rough. He's
Mm-hmm.
not finding his footing in it anymore. He's now very aware of that fear that he's writing into. He's aware of that wonder that he's writing into. He's aware of all of those things a bit more and has the ability to really talk about them in a way that like just knocks us out. When it comes to his style, you mentioned metaphor, and that is like very Ray Bradbury. When I was reading through his works and his essays and just studies on him, mythology or not mythology, but mythology, yes, but metaphor, big one for him. He truly believed that's the key to everything. That's the key to writing a good story, is finding a very sharp metaphor that is very specific to a situation that makes a reader feel that emotion, that puts them in that place. And so metaphor comes up so much in his work. And in these stories, it does get a bit out of hand. I think it's like a metaphor every sentence, and it can get a lot. And you're just like, Ray, what are you talking about? But it's like him trying to figure out like how do I explain this unusual experience in just as unusual of a way while still making sense to the reader. Sometimes he does it well, sometimes he doesn't.
Well, it's interesting to kind of like put like his later work, something like Dandelion Wine, or not even later, but just his sort of like more polished, focused work on sort of like a spectrum with crime fiction, which like I wouldn't think to do, right? If I hadn't read this book, so I've read a couple of his big novels, I've read a couple of his collections, he's got a lot of great short stories, but I wouldn't have thought of him next to crime fiction. But like pulp and crime and noir and detective often lean into that like overwrought metaphor kind of thing, right? Like your Chandler, like your Hammett. It's sort of this hard bitten thing that like I'm trying to almost like shock the reader with this like what the dead guy looked like, his fingers were mushrooms or whatever, like. And so it's interesting to see Bradbury playing in that space here, like really over the top. But then like, oh, you're kind of figuring out how this works in a way that then when you do something like Something Wicked This Way Comes, or even something, sort of quieter and softer like Dandelion Wine, you're able to use those metaphor to kind of like move the reader into these different spaces. Which is, yeah, it's funny to see like, it's almost like thinking of like, I don't know, someone learning to cook, the first time like the spice level's just all over the place, or, there's way too much salt or something, but then you can see how they're learning how to get it. And then later on you get something that's balanced.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of his work later, I want to say, like, it isn't very, like, it is metaphor heavy, but a lot of times he'll use more overarching metaphors, or he'll pick like very specific gut punch, knock your head off metaphors, and he'll sprinkle them in.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll focus on other elements, like a couple of ones that are very, or for me, like when I think about Ray Bradbury's style, the three things that come up, it's figurative language or metaphor, sensory details, and descriptions, specifically of the natural world. Like those are like the things that he leans into. And when you read his more focused works, his later works that came out after this collection, you kind of see that he starts to do it in a way that's not overdone. So instead of forcing like sensory details and metaphor and descriptions into one sentence, he'll be like, one sentence is my metaphor sentence. Next sentence is my sensory details. Next sentence is the action. Next sentence is it. And it's very clear and it's very clean. And he's not like just throwing so much, because some of the sentences in Killer Come Back to Me, the whole collection, it's a lot. And some of them are great and I highlighted a bunch and other ones I had to stop and be like, what did you just like
Mm-hmm.
what is happening? I have to like parse through so much. But that style helped him become known at the time as the poet of the pulps because he was that type of writer, and not a lot of writers of mystery and murder were doing the stylistic things on the line level that he was doing. So it did kind of set him off from a lot of the other mystery, crime, and thriller writers of the time. It also made it so that he didn't really see himself as a mystery writer or like a thriller writer. That wasn't what he was like really interested in when he was writing these stories. He was much more interested in the character. He was much more interested in the situation they were in and kind of exploring that. And it just so happened that they were mystery settings or like murderous settings or anything like that.
It's interesting. Like, I don't want to make a straw man of like mystery and crime that's very plotty, but that's what I think of them. I think of a mystery story as kind of being about the plot, right?
Yeah.
And he is so not interested in the plot here in a way that's kind of fascinating because like he's trying to get to other things. And he does like he likes a twist, right? In these stories, like he loves some kind of like last line zinger. He's not really interested in like what was the crime, what was the motivation, how did I figure it out? And to the extent that a lot of times I had to go back and reread sections because he'll just really lightly jump over like what the main setup is so that he can get to the other stuff he's interested in. In Dead Men Rise Up Never, which is the one where they're trying to like what are they? They're trying to like kidnap for blackmail a woman that the two crime bosses like are fighting over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is not a spoiler because it's like the first paragraph, but she dies and it seems like she just gets scared to death, but it's super not clear. The
Right.
entire story hinges on this woman dying, and I still don't know exactly why she died. And he doesn't really care. He's just like, well, she needs to be dead for the story to work. And then it goes on and does other like weird stuff. And there's a whole thing with like the drowned city, like sort of. Yeah, but anyways,
Yeah.
that really quickly moving past the major setup in the early stories is funny. But then you get some of the ones that are a little later, like you mentioned. The Smallest Assassin, which just rips. Oh no, I guess that's an early one. That's 46. All right, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I think if I had to guess because these are not in chronological order in here,
No.
and
Yeah.
I think if I had to guess, I would be wildly wrong because I would have thought that was a later one. But that one is like the way that like builds semi-comedic, semi-horrific tension is fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, Also just funny to see, like, I know Bradbury, like he worked in screenwriting a lot. You know, he dedicates this to Leigh Brackett, right? Like tons of his stuff has been adapted. Even so, reading this, I kept just being like, oh, this is in the DNA of Chucky, right?
Yeah.
There are stories here that feel like they're in the DNA of neo noirs, like Sin City or like The Nice Guys, right? Like, there's all
Yeah.
these little bits in here that even if they weren't adapted directly, I'm like, oh, people were reading this and picking up on this. You're setting up these pretty potent little images that are going to keep moving.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder because Ray Bradbury was this like he didn't even consider himself a science fiction writer or a speculative fiction writer. What he called himself, I believe, was a writer of myths, of modern myths. That's what it was. He was like, I don't do that. I'm a modern myth writer. And so when I think about that and I think about how influenced the world is by his works, and like if you read some of his essay collections, specifically Yestermorrow, it gets into his like future thinking, his like big ideas, because he was such a big idea guy. He had so many ideas like of shopping malls and how they should be laid out, how like towns should be laid out and built. He like worked with Disney at the beginning of setting up Disney World and like how that should be laid out to really drive not just my brain was going to say viewers, but how to drive people as they're walking through one
Mm.
setting
Hmm.
through other settings, like what to bring up to them, what to kind of like pull them in, and how to do it in a way that like isn't distracting, but is very natural.
Hmm.
And so when I think about all of that, and then I think about how kind of rushed some of these things were, how like overly focused he was, not on the murder, but on really the character, the world that they're in. And then I look at like the pieces and the years they came out. And I feel like, because Killer Come Back to Me, the title novelette, I think was his first. If I'm correct on that, I'm pretty sure that was the very first one he had published. I don't think it was the first one he wrote, but I think that was the like first one that he actually sold. That one is so trying to be, Ray Chandler. It's so trying to be of that era. And then as it goes on, he kind of drops that. He drops that really noir, voicey, pulpy, punch in the gut, like things are it's he drops that and he goes back towards his more I'm excited by this idea. I'm excited by this character. And that's what he focuses on. So if you are like a mystery reader and you love mysteries, you're not going to find that. In Killer Come Back to Me. You're not going to find like really well done and really thought out mysteries. And in The Life of Fiction, the like critical book on all of his work and his career and his life, there are moments where like I think they have some letters from him where he's talking about like, yeah, that's not important to me. Those elements of a mystery, that's not what really pulls me in. And a lot of editors would even be like, but you gotta figure this mystery out.
Uh-huh.
And so there was a lot of like help that he got along the way to make these stories as much of a mystery as possible. Because when he went into it, he wasn't like, oh, yeah, I'm going to write this like really spine tingling murder mystery. It was like, this idea excites me. Let me follow this thread and this character. And hopefully other things will like come out and make it an interesting read. But for him, it was all character.
Hmm. That's really interesting. That bit about Disneyland, that makes some things click for me actually. Because like I'm like personally, the circus and the carnival don't speak to me very much. If I see a circus, I'm not like, oh boy, let's go to the circus. That's just not how my mind works. But I do like when you see writers sort of identify another art form that sort of unlocks something for them, right? Like, so like for some people it's theater, for some people it's music, right? For, in science fiction, like a lot of the cyberpunks, right? They're thinking a lot about television and they're thinking about like, how does that shape our reality? For him, it's the carnival, it's the circus. And what's interesting about them is unlike a television show or even like a magician or theater, those are spaces that you enter, right? And you walk through. And like you said, like as a child, you're in this sort of like ambiguous, vaguely dangerous space that's often kind of like dark in places, light in others, and you have to enter it and move through it, like you have to enter and move through like Disneyland, right? And that to me, that something about that. I mean, obviously he's interested in the sideshow, he's interested in the specifics of the carnival, but something about that idea that for him, the artistic model of constructing a place where there's kind of a consensual deception and entertainment happening, and importantly, you move through it. And
Yeah.
that clicks for him. That's like the stories here that work for me. That's part of why, because he sort of makes this space, then you have to walk through it. And I think that's why, like when the Illuminated Man or Something Wicked This Way comes, those work because you've got to walk through the town, you got to walk in the tent, you got to go the places. And even the ones here that don't work super great, I think I see him trying to do that with those different landscapes, right? Like, what's the one with the canal murders, like the blackmailer guy, where everything ends, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Which is a really late one. He wrote that for an anthology. Or he might have, who knows, it might have been like a trunk story. But anyways, but that's all set in like the canals around the oil pumps in California.
Yeah.
And even though like the story didn't work for me super great. I could see him trying to make this very unusual landscape with these weird features, right? Like these oil derricks bobbing up and down and these like sort of cold, mysterious canals that you can move through and no one can see you. I can feel him making that work. And then he wants to pull us through. And even like, I don't know that he had the characters or the plot to do it here. That like approach still kind of jumps out.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing connected to that and how how he saw, I sometimes speak about him as if he's still around because he feels like that, so influential. But the way that, and when you read his essays that are specifically about place building and like his ideas on shopping malls and towns and how they should be structured in a way that invites someone in and then leads them slowly to connection, slowly to ideas, slowly to entertainment, to like nourishment and how to
Mm,
sort of like bring all of that together. And it was all about connection and excitement and wonder. He was like, you got to make it a place where people don't want to leave and they can kind of just like move around in it naturally, but not so supernaturally because
right.
like it's being guided by someone.
Hmm.
And his stories have that feeling, like especially these ones. I think even the stories I don't like, every single opening paragraph is such a knocker to pull you in.
Uh-huh.
It is such a like, welcome to this world, come on in. And you get super pulled in. And you're like, whoa, what is going on? This is really interesting. And then sometimes it'll fall apart quickly after that. But those openings, like he is really good at just like sucking you in to this story and like pulling you in and saying like, welcome, come in, follow me along this path. And sometimes he can keep, your hand and he could keep leading you down that path. And other times it does get a little wonky. But one of the ones that I really love that did a great job of this, The Town Where No One Got Off.
Oh, yeah.
That is it's one where I feel like I don't know if a movie's been made out of it, but it's a very cinematic story. And like it kind of pulls you in and it's a really short opening, but it like instantly triggers you. And if you don't mind, I would love to read the
Yeah,
opening. I
please.
have it. Yeah. Crossing the continental United States by night, by day on the train, you flash past town after wilderness town where nobody ever gets off. Or rather, no person who doesn't belong, no person who hasn't roots in the country, graveyards, ever bothers to visit their lonely stations or attend their lonely views. That's such a great opening. There's no character in there. It's just like, hey, we're on a train. There's all of these towns and wildernesses that pass by. No one ever gets off except for the people who live there. But it leaves that sort of question of like, okay, so is this a story about someone who gets off in a town they don't belong, or someone who gets off in a town that they do belong? And it's somehow different. Those lonely views, like yeah. But he's really good, at least in these stories, at least writing an opening that is kind of killer.
Yeah, no, totally. That is such a great story, and it's really short, right?
Oh yeah.
But that one is also fascinating. Going back to that idea of like being mad about being born and like why people kill. This one of the things that's fascinating. So one, like, okay, if in theory these are crime fiction, it's kind of like strange how like non mystery they are, right? And two is that the motivation for most of the crimes are real weird, right? They're not like, I mean, a few of them are like, this guy cheated on, my wife cheated on me, so I'm gonna kill her or whatever. But a lot of them are just these really weird psychological motivations that come from like, I don't know, some deep kind of Freudian strange places.
Yeah.
um, The Town Where No One Got Off, which I would probably give a different title if I were writing it today, is plays with this idea of just like everyone wants to do murder and you have to do something with that thought, right? Like what's that the guy he meets, I don't like either character name, right? Like it's kind of just two characters. And the one who's hanging out in the town says everybody'd like to do one killing in his life to sort of work off that big load of stuff. All those killings in his mind he never did have the guts to do, which I I don't think I'm like that. I don't know. Like, like that seems weird to say as like a universal thing is that everyone dreams about murder all the time, and that's like a psychological thing. But it plays with it so well in that story. And then what I love is that the way that that story then plays with the last one here, the utterly perfect murder,
Mm-hmm.
which is where the guy goes back to kill his like childhood, not even bully exactly, just his like childhood not very good friend, basically.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing of like the train as this mysterious thing that moves through the land, but it also kind of moves through time because when you go from Los Angeles to like some little town in the Midwest, it is kind of like a time machine. But that story, The Utterly Perfect Murder, has this like similar lineup as The Town Where No One Got Off about like you murdered for psychological reasons, kind of full stop. But then that has this weird redemptive question mark angle that goes back to that like recovering something about your childhood or like healing something about the inner child that's still in you in a way that's like threaded through with all this dark stuff. But I think that I get really frustrated with any people, movies, writers who paint childhood as this kind of like precious rosy thing, which there is some of that, but also like I think particularly like the age he's often talking about, like maybe like a kid who's like 8 to maybe like early teens kind of age, right? That's a weird, dark, strange time in a lot of ways. It's like it can be fantastic and magical, but like it's scary too. And you're like learning to like deal with all your own like big feelings. You don't know what to do with them yet. Bradbury's really good at like drawing on that and saying like that's still in us and that's still doing stuff. I just like how throughout this collection he kind of pivot to that sort of more childlike approach as a way to get at what's going on in the adults. I just really dig that.
Yeah, and it's really curious because I'm trying to remember through all of my research, but I want to say those years for him, those were his years of where he moved from
Mm,
Illinois to California. And he went from like small town living close to a lot of family members to like just being with his primary family in a place that was filled with wonder. Like I remember in not Bradbury Speaks, but the Bradbury Chronicles by Sam Weller, uh, there was like a lot of talking about his sort of like teen years in California and spending a lot of time rollerblading and going to check out the studios and like trying to catch glimpses of all of this wonder. And it makes me think that Bradbury was the type of person who mentally never left that place. Not in like a Arrested Development way. He never lost that wonder and excitement. And I think that energy carries through a lot of his work. And I think he spends a lot of time, like you said, trying to remind people that like you are still that child. You are still that child. You're just in this adult body trying to make sense of things as if you're an adult, but you're still that child and you're still going through all of those emotions and things, which comes up very directly in Dandelion Wine, which
hmm
like that's very much the themes. There is a moment in it that I think of very specifically like as a moment in that book that almost made me cry. And like when I was reading through Bray Bradbury's biographies and just thinking about a man like that getting old. And as old as he did get, I forget what age he was when he died,
I think it was in his
but
90s, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
he lived for a very, very long time. And for a man whose brain never really, grew up from a child and always had that wonder, it must have been such an experience to go from, yeah, that child to that old man. But in Dandelion Wine, there's a scene where these two, I think it's two children, and they're interacting with an older woman in the town. I think she's an elderly woman. And they're like, you were never a kid. That never happened. Like, you were never like us, and we'll never be like you. And it's like this really intense, like, they can't fathom growing old. They can't look at someone and be like, this was a child too. And the way that it's done it's filled with so much sadness and so much like I forget how old he was when he wrote Dandelion Wine, but it was like he knew he would be like his mind would stay that like funny, young, wondrous child, but his body would not. His body would get older and he would lose that ability to go rollerblading down to the studios, to go hanging out on the beach, to go doing all of that type of stuff. Riding on trains a lot, traveling and exploring, that was all lost. And like, I'm thinking like to a man of wonder who saw the world in this way, who did a lot of like road tripping and train travel because he hated flying. It must have been such a heartbreaking experience to lose that,
Mm.
to like not be able to go out into the world in the same way, to see that wonder in the same way. So yeah, I think like that sort of like sticking to those young aspects or those younger sort of juvenile looks at the world where, yeah, you kind of have that like everyone around me is a killer waiting to kill. That really terrified, like kind of juvenile thought where it's like, I don't think that's true. I think like, yeah, there are probably some people who have that desire in them. But like for Ray Bradbury, that like as Knight said in the or was quoted in the introduction of like the fear of things that are not the self, like that is so permeated through the collection and through how he writes and through a lot of the themes, which is really funny because you read his like nonfiction, his actual essays, and he's like such a lovely, like he was just like so excited about the world and about the possibility, but also kind of terrified of people.
Mm. Hmm. Well, there's that tension all through his work, and I think you can even see it in this collection of being really excited about the things that are new, right? But also already having this kind of vision of like the past, right? Of my hometown as this sort of like idyllic, Edenic place that's sort of like in risk of being lost. And there's some of that tension here, and that's right. That's something that can very easily lead you to like a conservative, reactionary kind of approach. And I think you can see that tension even in this collection a little bit.
Yeah, and something that struck me when I was doing my study and deep dive into Bradbury while in school was I was wondering, is this a guy who would love someone like Elon Musk? Or is this
Mm,
a guy who would see Elon Musk as like the villain that he is?
yeah,
Um,
right.
or would he be like, oh, he's introducing all of these ideas and inventions? Because he loved that. He wanted more invention, more things. And I think where it got scary for him, as it appears in a lot of his writing, is what people would do with that,
Mm.
because you can't always trust people with technology. You can't always trust people with like the wondrous things. 'Cause I think in a lot of his stories, what ends up turning the wondrous into danger is not the wonder, it's someone. It's a person taking that wonder and just really twisting it. The wonder is in the thing, the idea, and it gets scary and it gets dangerous once people come into it.
There's also this funny thing, and I want to come back to that identity thing, just because it's wild to me that both the two really science fictional stories here, the two marionette stories, are so like in the like, Asimov, Philip K. Dick kind of like line, replicants, and is the robot human or not? What's the second? Punishment Without Crime.
Yeah.
That is like hilariously like if you taught that today, it would so clearly be about AI, and like AI rights. It's really funny. So here's that, and Killer Come Back to Me, the title story, right, is about like to me like this slightly like Philip K. Dickey setup of like what does it mean to become someone else or for people to want you to become someone else. But that's just fascinating line through it. But it's that thing about people, and Bradbury throughout these and throughout everything else as I've read has this very odd, I don't even want to say ambiguous, it's almost like he's really of two minds about people and he can't quite make it up. Like there are characters here that he has such enormous sympathy for, and he's so humane about them. But he also, I think, a lot of times thinks that people are fundamentally not good or fundamentally have like such dark impulses in them that will just break out if things are wrong. He's not a person like, even in these like crime stories, he's not a person where just a villain comes in who's like a dismissible bad guy, right? It's more like, no, like everyone kind of has this darkness in them and it can come out. The paired stories about the serial killer, the strangler, which is
Mm-hmm.
what are those called? I have them here somewhere. The Whole Town Sleeping, and then
Yeah.
At Midnight in the Month of June, which by
Right.
the way, hilarious to me that they were published like 4 years apart in different magazines and they're like back to back. But
Yeah.
so these are about, the first one is the perspective of this woman and two of her friends who are in this little town that feels very like, the little Midwestern town. And there's a serial killer around. And then in the second one, you get the perspective from the serial killer. And he writes both of those sides with such immense like sympathy. Like obviously like the serial killer is, deranged, has something strange going on, but is written so almost kind of beautifully. That it's like, here's a person who has leaned into this odd darkness that's in all of us. And he's not killing people because he's like a mean guy. It's like, it's much weirder than that.
Yeah. It's much scarier in a way because it makes it like you could be this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like, yeah, it comes up so often. And I think he writes a lot of characters, a lot of the like villainy characters or the evil characters in that way because it makes me think of some of his sci-fi stories, particularly the ones that jumped out were The Women, which is a short story, I think, from Sing the Body Electric, his short story collection. And it's about this couple that's on a vacation at a resort. And the whole time, the woman is just like, there are some weird things going on here. I'm feeling weird vibes. And the husband is just like, whatever, honey, like everything's fine. That happens throughout this whole story. And then at the end, the man goes on a swim into the water. Spoiler alert, there is a monster and it's the water. The water is the scary there. And at one point towards the end, I think it's like the last page, the perspective shifts from the man and woman to the monster in the water. And like her voice takes over. And it's such a like as she's killing this man, it's beautiful. She's having a great time. She's talking about the bubbles, the way his hair moves in the water, the way he like struggles for breath. But the way that he writes it isn't like, yes, I'm gonna murder and kill. It's beautiful and it's very sweet and it like has that sort of sympathetic feeling of like, oh, but if you're this person doing these things, or if you're this monster or creature, you're not going to be thinking, I want to hurt, I want to damage, I want to do all of this. You'll be thinking more along the lines of like what we would normally think about something that's totally normal and average.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes up again in Fahrenheit 451 with, I think, Captain Montague, the captain of the fire department. He is not written in a way where he's like, oh, I'm a super aggro, intense man. And even when he explains why they're doing the burning, it's very much so like, no, but this is our job. This is what we do for these reasons. And this is why we have to do them. It's convincing. It's
Mm-hmm.
like convincing you that these bad ideas are actually right.
Mm-hmm.
And that has that element of like, yeah, scariness of like, oh, so like anyone who believes this can easily do these actions if you just believe it, if you're just like in it. And Ray Bradbury is really good at like, yeah, putting you into that perspective, into that character. That's where his like character writing comes out really well. And it's like just sucks you in. And you're like, okay, I guess this person is doing this wild thing that they should not be doing, but I see why they're doing it.
The serial killer in At Midnight in the month of June. I'll just read this little bit I just really liked. He's thinking about this time when it has this whole thing where he flashes back to playing hide and seek and the
Mm,
sort of like the thrill of playing hide and seek. And it flashes to this scene when he climbs, I think like a water tower or a fire tower or something, and looks out at the town. And that feeling of just power of just being able to see and not be seen. And he says, "And God, how powerful to be undiscovered! How immense it made you, until your arms were branching, growing out in all directions, pulled by the stars and the tidal moon, until your secretness enclosed the town and mothered it with our compassion and tolerance. You could do anything in the shadows, anything if you chose to do it. You could do it." And the way just leans into that feeling. And I love that again it flips back and forth to him as a child, right? And like that story ends with the serial killer getting like milk and cookies, right? And like this like odd reversion. Yeah. We have been talking really good. Let's take a really quick break. I'm going to get a drink, not of milk and cookies. And then
mm.
let's talk a little more.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great.
Your space,
All right, we are back. We are still talking about Killer Come Back to Me, and we've been covering a lot of good stuff. I wanted to just mention, and we'll see where it takes us. One of the stories that I don't think we've talked about yet that I just really really liked. It's called "And So Died Riabouchinska," which is this was one that was published in a detective magazine, and it opens on one of those great, as you said, like openers that just like immediately you know what's up. What is the beginning line here? It's
I've
great.
got it here if you,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
go. Give us the
just the
open.
beginning line.
Yeah, or one or two, whatever makes sense to you.
Yeah, I'll do I think the opening paragraph only has three sentences. They're just long sentences. So I'll just read the first one. The first line for this story is: the cellar was cold cement, and the dead man was cold stone, and the air was filled with an invisible fall of rain, while the people gathered to look at the body as if it had been washed in on an empty shore at morning.
Oh, that's so it's because it's doing the like you're reading a pulp magazine, the dead man was there, but then the invisible fall of rain, and then like as though it had washed to shore, like oh, yeah. So this story is about a murder case. We open like with the detective there, like talking to people. The main suspect is this guy with the famous marionette act, and of course, like an actual puppet, marionette, a ventriloquist. And of course, it turns out that like the ventriloquist relationship with the dummy is like more complicated than more complicated than we would expect if we had never encountered a marionette before in fiction, but we kind of expect it, right? But it's a really weird, beautiful story. It has this like I don't even want to call it a skeleton. It has this like little sketch of a murder story that totally makes sense. It's about like this guy got killed. There was like an affair. There's some jealousy stuff. There's like some blackmail stuff. Like the doll is based on this woman who the ventriloquist had like an abusive relationship with, and then went missing. It's kind of left open. Like she might have been killed. Not really clear. But so that's kind of the sketch of it. But all that makes it work is this language stuff, where again, like it opens in this like perfect pulpy way, and then immediately is jumping to this stuff that's like just very Bradbury. And I want to read. There's this bit towards the end. Again, not a long story. So the detective is questioning the ventriloquist and telling him, "I want the truth. I want the truth." And again, this is just like sitting down, being interrogated. And it says, "The truth. There was a whisper like the sea coming in on the gray shore at early morning. The water was ebbing in a fine lace on the sand. The sky was cold and empty. There were no people on the shore. The sun was gone. And the whisper said again, the truth." And that paragraph just comes immediately before that paragraph. We're just like sitting in a room in chairs. And in the paragraph after that, we're just sitting in a room in chairs. But it's calling back to that opening imagery. And it's just this utter dreamlike, not really clear who exactly the perspective is that is this. Is it the guy being interrogated? Not super clear. And it does it again at the very, very end. I'm not going to read the whole end, but the whole ending of this is just like gorgeous. Like the last like 4 or 5 paragraphs where it pulls out again. It goes again. It goes miles away in a cave. A single wave came in from the sea and whispered down in foam. And so it's almost like this sort of like bilocation. Like we're living in two places at once. We're here in this gritty, pulpy noir scene, but also there's this sort of like magical but very natural thing that we need to like be holding in our head at the same time. I thought it was wonderful in a story about like, a blackmail murder and like a creepy talking doll.
Yeah, I think that that's one of those where the like traditional mystery thriller, or not sci-fi, mystery thriller is trying to come through, but Ray Bradbury's like, no, but what's more exciting is character emotion, character feeling, and metaphor, and trying really hard to get the right metaphor to create the right feelings so that the characters and what they're going through feels good, or not feels good, but connects to the reader, like touches the reader, goes beyond just being like, oh, that was a fun story, but like, whoa, like there are a lot of lines throughout where you kind of want to stop after reading them and just kind of sit with it and be like, yeah, I guess that has to do with the story, but really that was just a great line. That was just like a really well done line. And I think his style in that particular story is a bit more focused or on point. I don't remember what year that one came out, if it was a later story.
Came out
Or not?
in 53, so after like the early ones, but still like
Okay.
reasonably early for him.
I think that like that is one of those stories that, like you said, you get those glimpses of like Ray Bradbury and his style, and it pulls you away from the mystery. Because yeah, when I think about that story, I'm not thinking about the mystery at the heart of it. I'm thinking about like, wow, that was just like a really beautifully written story.
And he has that even in the ones in here that are, I think, really like fun, like kind of like schlockier ones. Like
Yeah.
there's what's the one, the Smiling People, which is very like Poe like, right? Where like the guy's like killed his family and stuck him around the table.
Yeah.
But like the atmosphere is fun, right? And like the like he's like trying to make the house perfectly silent, because like
Yeah.
presumably because like every sound is like reminding him of what he's done.
Yeah.
And there's the one after that with the guy trying to clean the crime scene and like
Mm-hmm.
kind of like going over the top and sort of like vaguely OCD-ish and like not being sure it's clean enough. It's like it's very funny, but it has this horrifying element, but it also has these like, yeah, these very Bradbury feeling little flourishes. Like there's the thing where in the one it's in The Fruit at the Bottom of the Bowl where the guy's cleaning and cleaning,
Mm-hmm.
cleaning the crime scene. It has all these little spiders that keep coming out and like just little weaving their little webs in the corners. It has these odd little flourishes that are really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
A thing I that struck me reading these sporadically, was just an odd little note was how Bradbury uses whiteness as a shorthand for beauty. And so there's lots of always women characters who are their white moths, their white flames, their white lanterns. They have ivory skin. They have it goes on and on and on. And I don't want to say this is like I really don't want to say this is like a misogynist collection, but it has like this like particularly because like he has right like the few stories that do have a woman or a girl as the main character, I think do a great job, and there's nothing kind of strange about them, but women are really used as like objects in a lot of these, and there's just some. There's one femme fatale in Killer Come Back to Me, right? Who's like,
Right.
we know that character, we know who that is, and there are some like more nuanced characters. Some of the what's the one? Some Live Like Lazarus. Lazarus with the narrator who's like this. You don't really know anything about her, but she's this woman that this like weird rich guy falls in love with. But she seems like a really interesting character. But a lot of times the women are just kind of disposable bits. A lot of times they die like right at the beginning or even before the story begins. And that coupled with some of this sort of like construction of whiteness as beauty was just something that was occasionally rubbing me as kind of dated and kind of coming from a place that makes me a little uneasy.
Yeah, for me, I remember having those feelings, but those felt very typical. Uh,
Yeah.
it is one of those things where like I think I come across that a lot where like the way that white writers write about beauty or about like someone, it is usually focused a lot on like, yeah, white is the epitome of beauty. And I think a lot of that, especially for Ray Bradbury and during this time, it makes so much sense to me. Like, I don't know if he had a lot of interactions with Black people at that point in his life, or if he had interactions. I think he had a lot of interactions with Mexican people and other Latina people, especially because of where he was. But when it comes to like thinking about what's beauty, he is going to think that it's whiteness because his family is white. His friends are white. You know, the woman he marries is white. Like it's all very white. So it kind of jumps to that. And I think a lot of it, especially the misogynist, because you're right. It's not a collection that's like a misogynist collection. And I wouldn't say that Bradbury is that type of way or was that type of way, but he was a 20-year-old white guy. So yeah, women did kind of have a very small agency and portion. But then when you look outside of his life, like he mentions Leigh Brackett as like a huge inspiration for him in like learning how to write. And so I think it just took him time to figure out how to write a woman character that wasn't just a tool for
Mm-hmm.
him. And I think it, took a bit of practice and took a bit of time. And these stories, I think, were very much just like, yeah, a young white guy writing some stories where he was like, yeah, I love white women because that's who I'm interested in. But I'm interested in them. And I want to say in The Bradbury Chronicles or one of his bios, they do talk about how when it came to women, he wasn't like a big time dater.
Hmm.
He wasn't a big time like he didn't like go chase after like it wasn't that. He I think went on one like I think his dating history is really small and it's primarily with the woman he ended up marrying.
Hmm.
So it wasn't like he was in real life that sort of misogynist, oh, chasing around women, using them for this. But I think when it came to like thinking deeply about women, he didn't have a lot of to go off of at
Hmm.
that point. And I think it comes out later where he does write more nuanced characters, especially women. He has a couple of stories. I think there's just three or four where the main characters are black people or like a black person. And he does them better than most writers at that time. I'm not saying he does them really well, but he did them better than
Hmm.
writers at that time. And one of his essay collections, I think, kind of gets into it, but he kind of talks about getting to the point with writing characters where he had to stop thinking about their gender, their race, their ethnicity, and really focus on their emotions and like their experience of the world, which like we know now that all of those things play into that.
Hmm.
Like my experience as a world in the world as a black woman is going to be different than someone's experience in the world as a white trans woman.
Hmm.
Those are just going to be too different. But for Ray Bradbury, it was like, no, 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 those things don't matter. The like emotions, the experiences, all of that matters. And like race and gender aren't super big in that. And it doesn't come like it makes me think like, okay, right, if he was writing right now, would he still do those types of things? Would he still use women in the same way? Or would he have like learned and grown? And like, we'll never know. He just like has these stories out there that do have a very like white people. These are stories about white people doing white people things and not like a really big diversity in this collection.
Again, that's that kind of like that dark side about like fantasizing about a little town in Illinois as like the place you want to get back to, right? But
Yeah.
I don't want to like, I never want to like take like sort of like pop psychology and like apply it onto writers. But what you're saying made me think a lot about how there are writers who I think their approach to people just kind of socially really like shapes like the style of character that they write. I mean that's a very like obvious thing to say maybe, but that like when Bradbury feels like someone who is always a little bit standing back. He's always like he likes to look out and see what's going on. And obviously like he's a big talker, like he likes talking to people. He's not like an isolated person that way. But I think he leans towards writing a character who kind of moves through the world kind of like an isolated child trying to figure things out, right? Even
Yeah.
like the serial killer here, right? It's not called like the Ravine Strangler or something like that. He's called the Lonely One. That's the name
Yeah.
for the serial killer. And thinking about that compared to I've been rereading some Butler lately, and the way that like in a lot of Butler's novels, they have a very strong central viewpoint often, but the personal connections really hang off two or three or four other characters, and you get a real sense of like those other characters as having like power and motives that affect like how the viewpoint character moves through it. Less like one character just kind of like watching stuff. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
going anywhere with that, but just that idea of like Bradbury being really strong at kind of like a child kind of staring in wonder, less at like an adult at the dinner table with five other people that you really get into their heads and care about. It's just kind of a different approach to character.
Yeah, and that makes me kind of just think about the way that yeah, he was, and I think a lot of his characters are him, like they're aspects of him. And he doesn't, even though he says he gets really into the character and like who that character is, I think a lot of times it's more he got really into himself and those like very specific emotions or feelings or fear, and then transpose them onto a character.
Last thoughts on this collection? Anything particular? Oh, I have one. I have one. It's so minor. I was really struck by and really enjoyed how many of these characters smell things. Um, it's not like over the top, but like there are multiple points where like characters like oh like they recognize who else is in the car because they can smell them, or like
Yeah.
they miss a character who's gone and they miss the way they smell. It's just an odd little touch that I feel like I smell and taste are ones that I feel like I always love it when they show up in fiction, and they don't always. So I dug that.
Yeah, and Bradbury's style, like I do think sensory details are a big one. He's really big on, yeah, smell, on how something like sounds, the touch of something, like the texture of it. And in some openings, I think when he does a sensory detail, it will be something kind of unusual. Like the intro to the marionette story that we were just talking about, that I read that first line, and the mentioning of an invisible rain fell. When I read it, I felt it in my skin. I was like, what would that feel like? Is that like you feel mist in the air? But he doesn't say, you feel this on your skin. But sensory details like that, the more unusual ones, I think he did rely on to pull people in, to make people be like, oh, that's interesting. It's not just what I'm seeing, but what I'm hearing, what I'm smelling, what I'm feeling. Yeah.
All the little details in the what's the smiler one, the smiling people, all the little sound details of like him being like, oh, like he has 2 layers of carpets down, so you can kind of hear your footsteps through the 2 layers, and what that it makes you do a little bit of work to think about like what either like what would that feel like, or what would that sound like, or why does it sound
Yeah.
like that? Why does it look like that? It kind of makes you reach a little bit.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you for picking this collection. I often say this at the end of episodes that I don't know when I would have got to this otherwise, and I'm so glad that I did. This was really, really cool. I knew that he wrote crime fiction, but I didn't have like high on my list like get to reading Bradbury's crime fiction. This was cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like if people are really into Bradbury and they've had that thought about, his crime fiction, like, oh, I don't have to read that. Like, I love his sci-fi and his fantasy and his others. I recommend reading this book because it really does give you those glimpses at how he got there.
Also, although I'm not a fiction writer, I think it is really fascinating in his afterword and then looking at these stories how kind of transparent he is about like the working process.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Before we go, where can people find you? What are you working on that you want to plug that you're excited about? And tell me more about Darker Times. This is a new thing.
Yeah, I'll start with Darker Times because that is something I'm really excited about and working on. So, Darker Times is an online magazine focusing on horror culture and criticism. And I started it with three other horror writers, Anna Dupree, Emily Hughes, and Jessica Woodbury. And our whole focus right now, we just did our soft launch at the beginning of June. And now we are working towards, yeah, building our subscriber base, publishing more frequently, really trying to build a sustainable magazine that takes a humorous but critical and personal look at horror. And we don't really have like we only review horror movies or we only review horror books. Like that's not it at all. Like we want to write about horror in all of
Mm,
its facets and look
hmm
at it really from a lot of different angles. We recently this month have published a lot of like queer horror type of takes because
Cool.
happy Pride.
Yeah.
But like in the future we want to keep going and just covering like horror games a lot, and we want to talk to like designers, and we want to really get into looking at horror in a way that kind of reaches past regular horror readers and viewers and into people who might be like, I didn't think horror was for me, but this article on we just have one that's about to come out that's on the history of YouTube horror shorts.
Mm.
And like that is one of those pieces where I'm like, oh yeah, even if you're not a horror fan, but you're like a YouTube shorts person, a YouTube movie person, that one is like, oh, that's really interesting. I kind of want to like learn about that and I want to look into it. And so that's Darker Times. And people can find that at darkertimes.com. We publish at least two pieces a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, but we try to stay on a pretty regular publishing cadence. I'm really excited about that. Other places that people can find my writing. is on Substack. I have a publication called Writing Skins, and that takes a deep dive look at books and stories. I have several Ray Bradbury essays up there now for people to read, where I kind of get into specific stories and specific styles and techniques that he does. I have an essay on his short story, The Women, which I talked about earlier. And I also have an author website, AignarLWilson.com, where people can check out any upcoming classes, my writing resources, and just more of my work, as well as hire me for any editing or mentorship services. And then I do have some upcoming classes. I have one through Clarion West that should be open to signups at the end of July, and that'll be all about atmosphere. And I'll look at the various levels of atmosphere and how writers can control them in their own stories. And it'll be an hour and a half class, really deep dive into atmosphere and really looking at specific ways of making the atmosphere in your stories high end or lower, depending on what you were trying to do in a specific section. And then my last project that I wanted to talk about is one that I have been working on for about a year now, and it just released. So I have built a writing tool called the Scene Builder, which takes one or a couple of my popular articles on spreadsheeting novels and using scene cards to edit or revise or even draft a short story or a novel. And it takes all of that research that I did for those articles and then puts it into an actual tool that allows people to build their stories scene by scene using scene cards. And the information they input in them are things like setting, word count, characters, internal conflict, and all of that jazz. And then the program, without using AI in any way, just want to say that this is not an AI tool, but it takes what the author has input and it helps them troubleshoot their scenes. So it allows them to pinpoint where there might be slow pacing or fast pacing based on the conflict that's happening in the scene, mixed with the word count. It'll help them figure out where there's unresolved conflict, where they brought something up and then they never actually resolved it later on. It helps them find emotional tension issues and stuff like that. It's a pretty nifty, fun tool. It's free. People can use it right now. I'm definitely in a beta test mode where I'm just like, hey, use this as much as you want, break it, help me make this better so that it can be a tool that writers can use to be either drafting their stories, pre-drafting their stories, or revising them. And people can sign up for that and use the tool at scenes.prohomewriter.com. So that's kind of it for me, which after I said all of that, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just a couple of things.
Just a couple of things.
Just a couple of things. But yeah, that's where people can find me. That's what I'm working on and what I'm excited about. Yeah.
I'm picturing a little flashing like button at the bottom of the program that says like Chekhov's gun still on shelf. That's very cool.
It's not that intense, but it does have a little panel that'll pop up and be like, you've got a lot of unresolved conflict here.
Cool. Well, that's very cool. That is also I sympathize with saying like, oh, I don't have much going on, and then well, actually, you've got a lot going on. That's very, very cool. I will put notes to all that in the show notes so people can click on those if they want. Aigner, thanks again so much for this book. Thanks for sharing all your Bradbury knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
And yeah, we'll catch you around. Not at conventions this summer, but at some point we'll probably run into each other.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, congrats! You may be good. A few different ways you can do that. You can join our Patreon. Throw us a couple bucks a month to keep the podcast and the magazine sustainable. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a few other perks on the way. If you're interested in a book we mentioned on the podcast, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut. It helps immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, elaborate compliments? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can also follow us on Blue Sky for however long that stays cool, and probably slightly past that. Next time, Landon Hickman of the illustrious Death Sentence joins to discuss Fleur Yegi's The Water Statues, a fascinating, strange little book. More good stuff on the way. Check the website if you'd like to read ahead. As always, thanks for listening and stay critical out there.